Well, after considerable trial and trouble, I did get that all back together. Now, there was nothing technically awkward about it. It was just a matter of trial and error to get the positions of the brass gear with the little planetary gear on it in place correctly, the shutter speed and the aperture settings. But I did get it on, I did get it all connected up, and you can cock and fire the shutter quite easily from the back. The settings, they're lovely and smooth. That just works, that's just nice, that's really good. So I'm quite happy with the state of that. The aperture moves smoothly, the shutter speed, the click stops work well. It's just running really nicely. So now I put the rear lens group back in place before I put this back piece on, because it's just much easier for access. You could have put it on through there, but it's much easier to access it before you put that plate on. So I've got that part assembled. It'd be nice if I could show you blow by blow as I went through it, but to be honest, there'd be an hour of going backwards involved in that, and it wouldn't be very exciting to watch anyway. Suffice it to say, it is possible. It is back together. Everything works. The shutter speeds and the diaphragm setting there, they counter rotate, and that's all working correctly. Everything's working nicely. Depth of field pointers, they're moving smoothly. Virtually no resistance there. As you change the aperture, they just swing in. Just lovely. So I'm very pleased with that. I'm going to get this on the camera as it stands, and I'll put the lens back in the centre and the front lens on afterwards. I've got to fight to get this onto the camera body first. So really, I've got two challenges. I've got to get the transfer shaft or the cocking shaft, which is here. I've got to get that correctly positioned in there, and then I've got to get this all down in position, and at the same time get my shutter release shaft here, the pin on that correctly positioned into this hole here, all at the same time. Now this rod for the rangefinder, that can go in from the front, it can go in from the back. Because it can go in from the front, it will be going in from the front, because it's much easier for me to put it in from this side than have it floating around loose in the back of that setup. So that's my next task, is to get this sitting in place, and then wriggle this into place on the camera, hopefully getting the timing correct so that it cocks the shutter as the film advance reaches the end of the stroke. That's the theory. Let's hope it's good in practice. Oh, and the other thing I had to do was the timing of this piece here. That's the piece that revolves with the meter settings, and I had to get that correctly timed, and basically it was a case of setting this to be an F22 and consulting my diagram for my picture, and it showed that the flats on this point towards the centre of the lens when this is set to be an F22. And if that's correct, then that'll couple to my meter here correctly, because that has to couple with the slot in that drum. And all this will go back on the camera. Hopefully everything will run smoothly. But first things first, got to get this thing to run. Well, I have the shutter correctly assembled back to the body. It's been a bit entertaining. It is quite possible to have the top in place and get that shutter release over. I had to fish around with a fine hook to position the shutter release shaft to line it up with the hole in the lever on the shutter body itself. I also had to line up the shaft, the cocking shaft that couples up here, of course, and the meter drum connection down there. and it took some shuffling backwards and forwards to achieve that. But I've got it to the stage now where the shutter cocks and fires correctly. The meter is coupled. I haven't set the cord position at the top here yet. I'll do that as a final adjustment. But it is coupled. The dials moved through their full range without the cord binding or reaching the end of its travel at any point. So I'm quite confident that it'll work well. You can see the depth of field pointers there. They move correctly. As I move the aperture in and out, you'll see them swing backwards and forwards. And of course, as you change the shutter speed, the dials counter-rotate to keep the same setting, the same exposure setting. Because you use the meter here, you move the dial at the bottom to set the EV value effectively correctly, and then you can choose from your available shutter speed and aperture combinations, providing that exposure value. So that's all working well. Probably needs a bit more fine tuning to get things to run really smoothly, but the main thing is I've got it all together and it is working. I need to add the rangefinder, and I need to add the rangefinder pin here and put the focus mechanism, of course, on the front of the camera. The front element all needs to go back in place. But it's come to the end of the day now for me, so I'm just going to pack this lot away and come back to it on the next available working day, which might not be the next available calendar day. Well, I've relented. I'll do a little bit more work. This is the centre lens group, the one that screws into the front of the shutter. So I'm just removing the old grease from this, which is always a pain of a job. Look at that nasty green stuff. It's always a pain of a job because it's very hard to get the grease out of there without getting something smeared on the glass, which then takes an age to get clean. So I'm just using some naphtha here on a cotton bud and hoping to lift out that filthy old grease. You can see how green that is. That's pretty unpleasant stuff. And then I've got to clean the glass thoroughly before I screw it into place in the shutter. The grease is it's just decayed from age, so it's like a wax. It feels like a wax. The glass is looking very good there, so hopefully it'll clean up nicely. You end up cleaning the glass multiple times typically. You need to clean the lens while you've got it out of the shutter, because you need to be confident that you are going to be able to clean it. It's typically quite difficult to judge that you've got all the possible smears off the lens before you start. Right, let's just make sure I blow out any dust that's in the shutter. So I'll set it to B, and we'll set the aperture to open, wide open at 2.8. That's just to blow out any dust that settled in the shutter while I was working on it. Get this lens started. Of course, I've got my special tool to do it up with, which is a handy thing. But that's running smoothly in the thread now. The thread, as I said earlier, was painted. It had black paint in there. There's no special reason for that to have been painted. It's just probably a minor production problem. There, I've just done that up tight. Needs to be nipped up. Doesn't need to go crazy doing that thing up. But now that it's in there and I've got the black of the shutter behind it, I'm in a better position to judge how clean that is, and it does look good. So that's very good indeed. I'm going to put the rangefinder on the top of the camera before I put this shit in, I think. Or should I put it in straight away? I don't think I can come to any harm putting it in at this point. What I'm concerned about is I don't want it pushing past the lever on the rangefinder if that is able to swing back further than expected. I'm just checking this to make sure this is absolutely straight too, because I don't want any stiffness in it. It drops in, it doesn't drop right through. I think that's okay, that can stay in there. I think that's going to be good. I'll put a very, very, very light wipe of molybdenum paste on this. I've just rubbed the vast majority of that off with my fingers. And that'll just take care of any roughness that happens to be present, if there's any roughness present. I've got to clean this lens before that goes on. We've got the grease around here, of course, where it revolves around the other lens, where it screws in. So I'll use some naphtha, see if I can get that clean. And of course, because it's at the outside, a certain amount of dust always finds its way in. So I've got the decaying grease. It's gone like a wax, like a jelly. It's very unpleasant looking stuff. It's certainly not doing the job it once did. It's difficult to deal with because it'll break up into particles. Particles of it will fall off and drop off onto something that you're not seeing and then reappear at a later date. If it was a liquid or a semi-liquid, a grease, the normal, what you'd expect, it wouldn't be anywhere near as much a problem, because when you'd cleaned it up, it would wipe away cleanly. But these particles, waxy jelly-like stuff, can cause you a lot of grief. Right, so this cam surface visible here is the rangefinder cam. That's what drives the pin or pushes the pin inwards as it moves. I'm checking all this. I've got to clean that glass now because the glass is certainly not clean. As I cleaning this with a cotton bud, you always keep rotating the cotton bud so that you are presenting a fresh surface to the glass all the time, and that serves two purposes. One, it works really well, and two, it helps guard against the possibility that you'll pick up some tiny fragment of grit and then grind it into the lens as you're cleaning it. but here I can judge from reflected light, because the inside surface of this lens is comparatively flat, so I can judge by reflected light from the window whether I've managed to get that surface clean and streak free. Particularly concave surfaces are very hard to judge. This is the front surface I'm looking at here. I was just blowing the dust off it. Now there is dust on this, so I've got to be quite careful about cleaning it. So I want to lift off that dust, not grind it in. So very light strokes with a cotton bud moistened with glass cleaner to begin with. Make sure I pick up any loose dust that's in there. And the mount is quite dirty, so I'm going to clean around that. I'll try cleaning around that with some naphtha. This is the filter thread here. And this is just dust and finger grease and all the rest of it. But if I get this dust and grit out and away, then there's less danger that it's going to fall onto the lens surface and cause me any problems. That's pretty good. Now there's a couple of greasy marks on that lens I can see, which I probably just put there. The front surface of any lens, because it's open to atmospheric contamination, can suffer from all sorts of problems. Salt spray being one of the worst. Salt spray on a lens, you know, it can actually damage the coating, can even cause pitting on the glass. Yeah, this cotton bud's coming off dirty, so it tells me that the surround in here is quite dirty. Makes it hard because as you cleaning the glass, you're picking up some of that dirt, and then it finds its way onto the glass surface. You end up with smears you didn't have last time you looked. Once more, I think. I'm happy that the inside surface is good. Right, that looks good. And the lens has to be screwed back in place. Of course, the lens itself here is loose in the outer, so I can spin the lens in and then set my focus afterwards. So I want some grease on there. Yes, I've got a couple of choices. I could use helical grease, but actually in this case I think that this synthetic grease will work well. I'll just put a little bit on the thread. trying not to carry this over to the front face at all. See if I can get this lens to start. Yeah, that's just started. Okay. So I'll just tighten one of these screws up and use the mount to screw that in. I don't know how far this has to screw in. So I've got to set the focus, so I'm just adjusting this so that it goes as far in as it's going to go really at the moment. And then I'll make my adjustments. That's as far as it's going to go. Alright, well I'll check that focus. I'm not expecting that to be a difficult job, and then I can set my focus scale ring. Once I'm happy I've got that, I'm going to use an infinity target. I'll set the focus scale ring on the front, and the rangefinder of course has got to be adjusted once the rangefinder's been fitted. Easy. Well, I'm very happy with the focus there. I'm just make sure those 3 screws are just snugged up tight. That looks good. So the little conical section that goes in over the front there, now that can go in place. I'll just give that a wipe with some naphtha to make sure it's clean. I notice that there's a tiny spot of corrosion there, which tells me that at some stage the lens has been splashed. Yeah, see if I can get this to start. Just using a friction tool here. Yes, that's running down nicely. That's that. So that's my lens all sorted out, and for this particular camera, the rangefinder next, I think. That just needs to be put in place and adjusted. After that, it's just finishing up, putting the leatherettes back in place, putting the name badge back on the front, things of that nature. Oh, the meter, yeah. I've looked at the meter. It's probably about a half a stop out at the moment, which of course I haven't set it. So it's going to be quite easy to adjust that, I would think. And I'll show you how to do that. It's not a job I relish because it's easy to dislodge the meter while you're trying to achieve that, in which case you've got to open the whole camera up and put the cord back around the pulleys and do all those nasty things that you don't want to do. Well, the weekend has come and gone. I've got the camera body sitting here, and I have adjusted the meter so it reads correctly on a light source that I've got, and so I'm quite confident that where the dials are set, where this drum here is set, it's all correct. Basically the cord's not tied to the drum at this point. I haven't trapped the cord in the slots, so it's just free floating. But by setting my aperture setting this correctly, and I think I set it, that was the light level I'd set that to. Everything was sitting correctly at that point. And so I've got to lock the cord onto the drum now. Now I've got to be a bit cautious about this because I don't want anything parting company here. I don't want the meter coming loose on the camera. So my first task here is I'm marking the cord and the drum together, so that as I revolve that drum to get to the slot I need to trap the cord in, it's not going to, I'll be able to note if there's any shift there at all. I don't expect there to be, but I will be able to note it if I see that that cord is moving on the drum. Everything looks good. The slots should be round here further. I can see them coming into view. There are two tiny slots here and here. What I've got to do is the cord that's sitting at the bottom, I've got to lift that up, tuck that up the top there out of the way. The cord that's at the top, I've got to pull down, get through those two cuts and tuck back into place, then roll the first cord back out of the way. And if it sounds fiddly, it's because it's fiddly. It's not an easy job. So I've got a couple of dressmaking pins there because they're nice and fine. I've got a wooden toothpick to help me manoeuvre the cord around when I'm starting to poke and prod it so that I don't cut it. And let's see how I can get on. Well, that cord there, I'm trying to get underneath the cord that's need to lift that up. That's the cord at the bottom. I need to get under that. The cord's quite tight in this camera. If I can get under that. And lift that cord back up over that lip. No, I've just dropped it. Oh, it's tricky. It's fighting all the way. That's it. So the lower cord, the cord facing the base of the camera, that I've pushed back up to the top out of the way. Now the upper piece of cord there, I've got to now pull out and get through those little notches. Without knocking the meter loose in the process. No, it's just not happening today. Right, that's the makings of one end. That's in the slot at that end. That's in the slot at that end. So I can push that up. Now I've got to pull my other cord back down into its original position. I'm manoeuvring this with a wooden toothpick because I don't want to use anything sharp and risk cutting that cord. Okay, that's done. That happened. Alright, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to go and check this on my calibrated light source, make sure that nothing shifted while I was doing all of that. It looks good on where I had my mark, and assuming that that's fine, then I can fit the rangefinder.